Konnichiwa everyone. Today I've got a really fun project in mind. Today we're going to make a very simple, very effective Japanese toolbox. What we're going to do today is basically what these toolboxes have been throughout history. If you look up historic Japanese toolboxes, just Google in Japanese toolbox on Google, you'll get some of that Pinteresty, hippy dippy kind of stuff, but you'll also get some photographs of some old ones from the World War II era. You will not find any joinery on them whatsoever. You may find a lap joint, but everything is usually nailed together. That's exactly what we're going to do today. I have here some wonderful nails, and we're going to use these along with some of the cedar. One of the main tenets of Japanese woodworking is you use what's available to you and you make the most of everything that you've got. We're going to make the most of everything that we've got, and we're going to use what's available to us. So the first order of business is to establish that there really are no hard and fast rules for making these things. You really just want to make something that works for you and for your workspace, for whatever tools that you've got. So my general rule is to say that whatever your longest tool is, and I'm just going to take this 9.5-inch blade Ryoba here, and we're going to measure it out from roughly the edge of our 2x6 here. So I'm just going to assume that this is going to be the length of our toolbox, and let's just take our little hammer here, and we're going to give ourselves a mark right about there. So the nice thing about a nice cold day is that it stays pretty cold. Bad thing about a nice cold day is, well, it stays pretty cold. Alright, so we are almost marked down here. Thinking I'm going to get roughly 3/4 stock out of this. It's really not a big deal. I can always plane it down a little thinner if need be. Luckily cedar is very, very soft, so this really shouldn't take too long. Alright, that should be about it. Oh yeah, there we go. Check that out. Well, darn it. Well, that happened. So I think what happened with this particular one is that there was a check in the board that I didn't actually see until after I had split this in half. Probably just from humidity or lack thereof anyway. But, well, it's a pretty clean break. I think we can fix it and I think we can keep going, but that is a little annoying. Alright, well, considering that it is cold enough to freeze your coffee right inside your coffee mug today, number next on the agenda is to get some of these boards planed down. I'm not really going to bother too much with making them exact thickness. I'm just going to get rid of the saw curve just because it looks kind of ugly. Alright, so after all that, we got ourselves a nice little stack of some nice boards. These are roughly 3/4 thick, maybe a little bit thinner, but I honestly got pretty lucky because I did not expect the boards to be this clear. Red cedar is definitely my new favorite wood to work with. Alright, so basic construction for this is we are going to take our two floorboards here and we are going to nail them together using a couple of little scraps. These are also going to double as our feet. And cut nails, honestly, these hold pretty well. I mean, in most cases you can find buildings even from the, from the 1700s that were built with these that are still around. But we're also going to use a little bit of glue to reinforce the nails. Or we should say we're going to use the nails to reinforce the glue, but should be pretty good. I almost feel bad using this cedar for this kind of thing, but not really. All right, get the ugly side down here. There we go. Now one thing about this particular kind of hammer, this is called a Funate hammer, and this is actually intended to be a nail set on the back of this. Now, from what I've seen is that the typical Japanese carpenters will drive the nail home, flip this around, and then pop the nail down below that. I don't quite have the skills to pull that off, so I'm just going to use another encouraging device to give these nails a little bit of encouragement. So one thing I should have planned a little bit better was I actually had this nail going right through a knot. That is not ideal, just FYI, but it's done now, so what can you do? Just remember, this does not have to be perfect, it just needs to work. Alright, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the base from which we will make the rest of our toolbox. Alright, we got our ends in. We're starting to take some nice shape here. So my next course of action is I'm just going to do the same thing I did with the bottom of this. Drill a couple of holes, nail it together, hope for the best. Well, she ain't pretty, but she'll get the job done. So to attach the base to this, we're just going to flip this thing over here. Going to use a couple of clamps just to hold it on there. So one of the final tasks that we've got to accomplish here is we have to get the lid made for this. We're going to use the same sort of general approach, but we're going to have some little covers on the sides here. You may recognize these. These are kind of the identifying marks of a traditional toolbox. We're going to use these two runners here, and we're basically going to have these be what holds the lid in place. Now the lid's going to sit flush with this top here, and it's going to slide in like a typical Japanese toolbox. If you haven't seen them, they kind of slide in like this, and then you move them a bit, and then they lock that way. But we're going to put a couple of twists on it. You might like it, you might not, but that's okay. So to get the lid put together, we're just going to follow the same sort of modus operandi we followed with the base. You don't want it to fit too tight, because as the weather moves, you know, they're going to move and warp and shift, and you don't want it to be just impossible to get it off. But we're not going to have it be so loose that tools will fall out either. A nice balance is key. So one of the things I'm going to do with this that's a little bit different than your average toolbox is I'm going to take one of these runners here and I'm going to cut a bit of a chamfer, more like an angle on this one side here. The first reason I'm going to do that is it gives you a bit of a grip for whenever you're opening the top of the toolbox. Second reason is one that I'll show you in just a second. I'm not going to go too deep of an angle, just enough so that this has a good bit of an edge on it. Alright, so we've got ourselves a nice little edge on that. Now before we get this nailed on here, I want to show you guys what this is for. So typically a traditional Japanese carpenter will use the side of his toolbox to balance his planes just like this. Now I really like this idea and I thought I'd take it a little bit of a step further. So rather than just having the sides be square, when you cut this chamfer, not only does it give you a grip, but I'm also going to cut a separate chamfer that matches up with the side of the toolbox, so that when you take the lid off, you actually have a place to put it, and I'm also going to make use of that space as well. It really doesn't have to be super precise, but you just want it to be deep enough so that whenever you put this on, it holds the lid firmly in place. Really not a whole lot to it. Alright, Alright, so I realized that during the course of this I may or may not have explained myself on how to use cut nails. It's actually pretty easy. Just find yourself one of your nails, take yourself a drill bit that's just a bit smaller than the nail, pre-drill all your holes and then hammer your nail home. The reason you do that is that cut nails run a very high risk of splitting your work. And trust me, you do not want to do that, especially if you're working with very limited materials. Now you typically want to drive your nails in accordance with the grain. If your grain is going this way, you want the nail to be oriented with the grain. If your grain is going this way, you want your nail to be oriented with it this way. I'm not exactly sure if this is going to work or not, but well, let's give it a shot. Let's see. Please don't split. All right, not bad. All right, we have our lid together. And time for a little test fit. It's a little tight. Nothing I probably can't get rid of, a little bit of scraping, but yep, that is pretty much it. And now getting back to that little chamfer I put on this guy, if you observe, we put a chamfer on the box as well. It will hold itself there, like so. That's going to be like a little tiny tool wall, basically, and yeah, it should make for a nice little compact workstation. All right, we're going to back up this edge with a little bit of glue. And I got a little bit of split on that one too, but no big deal. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's see what kind of a fit we can get. Oh, wrong side. Yeah, check that out. A little tight, but I think I can work that down after a bit. Now, if you remember from earlier, we had these scrap pieces that came off the sides of the top. We're actually going to make use of that, and we're going to make a little tool rack out of it. A wise man once told me, the best grip possible is with one's feet. Alright, so we got our 4 holes drilled, and rather than hammer them home, I'm simply going to preload this with the nails that we're going to be using. Then we're going to hit it with a little bit of glue for some extra reinforcement, because that never hurts. Then we simply set it where we want it. Just make sure you get it lined up with the holes you previously cut. A little close on that one. It's okay though. And so the last thing I'm going to do, instead of leaving these this long, I'm just going to take a good pair of nippers. You can use nail cutters. Make sure you wear eye protection when you do this. Just kind of clip the top off. The only reason I'm doing that is just so I don't have these extremely long pieces sticking out. You only need a little bit to really hang most tools. Does not take a lot to get the job done. Alright, well, a beauty queen she ain't. If you're looking for the fine shaved legs of a supermodel, you are going to be sorely disappointed. First thing that you can do in the practical sense is take your lid off. You can set it to the side. You can take your kana out, have them set up however you wish. Then once you have your kana out, you have your little movable tool wall here. As you remember, we put our little pegboard on this. This will mount directly to your toolbox. You can put your small saw, your really fun hammer, splitting gauge. Makes it easy just to grab whatever you're using most often. I mean, you can totally customize this to whatever you want to do. You know, you just got to make your stuff work for your space. This definitely works for a small space. If you've got a really tight, cramped workshop, kind of like I do, and I don't really even have a shop, I just have a balcony, you just got to make it work for whatever you need, and that's that. Now, the only other tool consideration I would say is that if you're going to have chisels in these, you need to get some way to protect the edges. A box is usually a good idea, or just some kind of little scabbards for them, but don't let them just bounce around in there, because you never know what they're going to be nicking or hitting up against. And you can also fit a couple of hammers in there as well, just whatever variety you want. Well, that certainly was a very fun and enjoyable project. I'm not going to bother putting a finish on this because I think that just the raw wood looks pretty cool and it just serves the purpose. I mean, totally practical, nothing special, so finish really is not required. You'll notice I didn't actually put the little handle piece of wood here. If you've seen the Toshio Date drawings, there's a little extra piece here with a little cutout. Didn't really work for me, so I just decided not to do it. Anyway, this should be a pretty fun little box. Should serve me well for a long time. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially thank you to the patrons on Patreon. You know who you are. As always, have an awesome day. Arigatou gozaimasu. Sayonara.